Hey guys, so it's time to make the molds, and to be so honest, part of me didn't even really want to show you guys this process because so many things went wrong, but I think it's important to share the good and the bad, and hopefully you guys can learn from my mistakes. So when I made the mold for the first figurine, the hand broke off. So I decided to approach this one a little bit differently and broke off the arm before making the mold, knowing that I could just attach it later. And honestly, when I made my very first figurines, I made the hand separately for this reason. This time I thought I could get away with it, and clearly that was not the case. But back to making the mold, the first thing I did was glue down my figurine just so it didn't slide too much. And then I also used like residual silicone that I had from some failed projects in the past. And the goal is to basically like build a box around your sculpture. So I'm using foam board and some hot glue. And because I'm making a two-part mold, I have to fill the box to the halfway point of the sculpture with this special type of clay, which will be linked in my bio. The most important part here is to make sure that the clay is completely surrounding the figurine, making sure that it's as smooth as possible and that there aren't any areas that the silicone can like sink into. You want it to be as flat as possible because the exposed part of the figurine is going to be the first half of the mold. Once I was happy with it, I finished making the box and started mixing the silicone, which I'm going to be using the Smooth On products for. And honestly, this is the only product I've ever used, so I really have nothing to compare it to, but it's worked well for me so far. Once it's completely mixed, you start pouring in one corner of the box slowly to fill it completely to the top. And I did add some more of that old silicone to fill it up even more because I have a lot of molds to make and this product is expensive. It takes about 6 hours for it to set, so I usually just come back to it overnight, and once it's good and solid, I open the box carefully so that I can still use it for the second half of the mold. The next step is to remove all of that clay and old silicone, but this was where I realized my first mistake. I forgot to add the registration keys, which are basically just areas that kind of like help keep the molds aligned when you're making the cast. So I went ahead and made my own registration keys with an X-Acto knife, and honestly it worked perfectly fine, so it wasn't that big of a deal. Once that was done, I put it right back in that same box, used more hot glue, and then went on to the next step, which is using this ease release spray. This is super important because it keeps the two sides of the molds from sticking to each other. If you do not use this, you will not be able to open the mold. You will essentially just get one large silicone block with your sculpture stuck inside. So I used kind of an excessive amount, and then I also went ahead and opened the box and even got all those angles that I couldn't quite reach just to be safe. Once that was good, I reassembled the box, mixed a new batch of silicone, and did another slow pour. Again, I let it set overnight and it was looking good at this point, so I was feeling confident. I opened it up from the box and started the process of peeling apart the two halves. And I used a lot of ease release spray, so that really wasn't a concern. It wasn't until I tried to split them apart completely that I realized it was not going to budge because of the way that I put my figurine in there. So at this point, the only way to get my sculpture out was to cut it. And I honestly was not sure how it was going to affect the mold, if the mold was still going to be usable or not. But regardless, I needed to get the sculpture out. So I did my best. On the way out, it broke the skirt, which I was not happy about. But I knew that was fixable. So really my main concern was the silicone and how the mold was going to work. When it came to the second half of the mold, I had the same exact problem. So I ended up having to cut both halves and even had to call in reinforcements to get it out because it was so stuck. And the head broke off, the arm broke off. It was just a mess, honestly. I've only made molds like a few times, but this was hands down the worst attempt I've ever had, ever. It was just so bad. It was like way worse than I was even expecting, and it caused a lot of damage to the piece itself. So I had a lot of things to fix, and I figured I might as well take you guys along for the ride because we can't leave it here. When I am fixing a figurine, I like to use a combination of the Sculpey glue and some clay to kind of like just bring everything back together. And then I also will put glue and clay on top of the crack. And this is partly to make sure that you can't see the crack from the outside, but mostly to make sure that it's secure and it doesn't break again in that same exact place in the future. And I did this for the skirt and the arm before wiping it down with alcohol to make sure that the clay that I just added is smoothed out before using my heat gun to set everything again. I repeated this process over and over with every piece of the sculpture that broke off, and really just like took my time to make sure that I filled in all of the cracks, even the ones on the bottom of the sculpture. Once I was finished, I was incredibly relieved because it looked good for one, but for two, it felt super secure, which is the most important part. So the next step was to test the mold, which I was very nervous about because I honestly was not sure if it was still going to work. There was definitely a chance that I was going to have to redo the entire thing. So I secured the mold using ribbon like I always do, and then went ahead and mixed together the casting material, which is still Smooth On products, and I slowly poured it into the mold. And this only takes about 8 to 10 minutes, I think, to set, so it's pretty quick. Once it was good, I went ahead and cut off all the ribbon and slowly started to take apart the mold. I was probably holding my breath at this point because it was like 50-50 on if it was gonna turn out the way I wanted it to. But once I got it out, it actually looked okay. The only thing was part of the arm was missing, but that's because I removed it, and it was a little messier than normal, but easy fix. So I was very, very relieved, to say the least. Now I still had 3 other molds to make, but these ones were a lot simpler. Obviously the figurine is larger and has so much more detail to capture, but these ones were pretty easy, so I repeated the process for the platform, the arm, just to make it a little easier to reattach them when the time comes, and the butterfly wings. I let all 3 of them sit overnight. 2 of them were 2-part molds and 1 of them was a 1-part mold, but they all turned out good, so I was very happy with that. I am officially done with the mold making process. Now you guys see why I was putting it off and why it scared me so bad. It's a lot every time I do it, but it's worth it to be able to make replicas of my pieces without having to re-sculpt an entire piece every single time. So if you have any questions, let me know. All the materials and products are going to be linked in my bio. The next step is to paint my figurines and make the cast, so I'm super excited because that's definitely my favorite part of the process.